Welcome to today's presentation. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide. Let's explore the historical development of ecology as a science. Modern ecological thinking really started taking shape in the 18th and early 19th centuries. Back then, the roots of ecology can be traced to natural history, which goes all the way back to the time of the Greek philosophers. They began observing and trying to understand the natural world around them. Then, in the 18th century, we see the development of classification schemes, most notably by Linnaeus. His system for naming and categorizing organisms laid important groundwork for understanding relationships among different species. Alongside these developments, laboratory biology also emerged, focusing on physiology, which is about understanding the functions of organisms, and structure, which looks at their physical form. These approaches helped scientists start to investigate how organisms work and how they are built. And of course, a major leap in ecological thinking came with the ideas of evolution, particularly natural selection. Recognizing that species change over time and adapt to their environments fundamentally changed how we see the interactions between organisms and their surroundings. All these elements, natural history, classification, biology, and evolution, are the building blocks that have shaped ecology into the science it is today. They connect to our overall theme by showing how our understanding of the natural world has developed piece by piece, leading us to more integrated perspectives on ecosystems and biodiversity. These gave rise to three somewhat distinct pathways of development in the mid-19th century. First, there was the physiological perspective, which emphasized the importance of stepping out of the lab and studying organisms in their natural environment. Ernst Haeckel, a pioneering animal physiologist, was a key figure here. He actually coined the term ecology in 1866, highlighting the growing awareness of the importance of understanding organisms within their ecosystems. Next, we see the emergence of a community perspective. This approach started with plant geography, particularly as developed by German scientists like von Humboldt. The focus was on mapping associations and vegetation formations, essentially trying to understand how different plant communities are arranged and how they relate to environmental factors. Finally, all these pathways were influenced by an underlying evolutionary theme, thanks largely to Darwin. The idea that organisms are shaped by their environment and that evolution is driven by interactions between species and their surroundings became a central concept. So overall, these three pathways, physiological, community, and evolutionary, each contributed to shaping our understanding of nature, building a more comprehensive picture of how organisms exist and interact within their environments. So, why did Haeckel feel the need to invent ecology? Well, he recognized that there was a crucial distinction to be made. It was about understanding the complex interrelations that organisms face in nature. This idea is closely connected to Darwin's concept of the struggle for existence, which highlights how species compete and interact in their environments. At the same time, Haeckel saw that the existing biology of his day was mostly focused on describing the structure of individual organisms and classifying them, what we now call comparative anatomy. While important, this approach didn't fully capture the dynamic, interconnected relationships in ecosystems. So, by inventing ecology, Haeckel was emphasizing the importance of studying these complex interactions and relationships within nature. It was a way to broaden our understanding beyond just the anatomy and classification, to see the bigger picture of how organisms coexist and influence each other in their environments. This shift is central to our overall theme today, understanding the interconnectedness of life on Earth. Interestingly, the concept or discipline of ecology didn't really take off immediately. The term itself was actually coined back in 1866, which is quite a while ago. But even then, it took nearly 2 decades before the word started appearing in a broader context, like in a book title in 1885. So it was slowly gaining recognition. Then, in 1913, the British Ecological Society was founded, marking a significant milestone, about 47 years after the term was first introduced. It shows how long it can take for a new scientific field to establish itself. And even more fascinating is that by 1938, an eminent philosopher of science pointed out that there was no single, widely accepted name for a field that studies the behaviors of organisms and groups within their environments. That's roughly 72 years after the term was first coined. It really underscores how, over time, the development of ecology was a gradual process, and it reflects how scientific disciplines often need time to find their identity and consensus. This historical perspective helps us understand the evolution of ecology and its role within broader scientific inquiry. So let's take a look at what ecological studies were like in the first half of the 20th century. Back then, ecology was primarily a descriptive and qualitative discipline, which means that scientists focused on observing natural patterns and describing what they saw, rather than quantifying or testing specific hypotheses. It was more about cataloging and understanding the complexity of ecosystems through careful observation. The key approach was to observe these patterns, like how plants or animals were distributed, and then try to link these patterns to underlying processes. For example, if you noticed certain plants thriving in a particular area, ecologists would hypothesize about what environmental factors or interactions might be driving that pattern. A great example of this is pines in the prairie, documented by Gates in 1926. This work highlights how early ecologists documented natural phenomena, laying the groundwork for later, more experimental approaches. And it's interesting to note that Paul Sears in 1944 emphasized that ecologists, more than any other biologists, continued the naturalist tradition exemplified by Charles Darwin. They were explorers of nature, seeking to understand the relationships and patterns without necessarily relying on experimental manipulation at first. Overall, this phase of ecology was about observation, description, and making connections, setting the stage for the more experimental and process-based work that would develop later. It's a reminder of how foundational these descriptive studies were in shaping the field. This naturalist tradition might be one reason why ecology was slow to be included as a formal part of the curriculum. You see, for a long time, ecology was seen more as a field rooted in natural history and observation, rather than a rigorous scientific discipline. Paul Sears, in 1960, pointed out that when you look at college catalogs, it's quite revealing. He noted that out of 12 leading colleges, 5 offered no ecology courses at all. Similarly, among 11 universities, 3 didn't include ecology in their programs. This highlights how, at that time, ecology wasn't universally embraced or prioritized in higher education. It reflects a broader trend where the subject was still emerging from its naturalist roots and hadn't yet become a core part of scientific training. Connecting this to our overall theme, it shows how the perception and acceptance of ecology as a formal science took time to develop. It's a reminder that scientific disciplines often face initial resistance or slow integration, especially when they challenge traditional ways of thinking or are rooted in older traditions. After the 1960s, we saw the rise of the environmental movement, which is often called the romantic view, seeing nature as something awe-inspiring, and also political ecology, which emphasizes environmental ethics. These ideas became really widespread and popular, and that was a good thing because it helped raise public awareness about how important ecological interactions are. But on the flip side, this popularity also led to some confusion. Many people started mixing up what environmental philosophy is versus what ecological science actually studies. So when people hear ecologist, they might think of being a tree hugger, saving whales, recycling, living off the land, rejecting the establishment, or going organic. While these ideas are connected to ecological awareness, it's important to recognize that ecological science is a rigorous field based on research, not just activism or lifestyle choices. This distinction is crucial as we move forward in understanding our relationship with the environment and how we can take responsible action. Even today, the misuse or misappropriation of the term ecology still occurs. For example, in A. Bramwell's book, Ecology in the 20th Century, A History, published in 1989, he discusses how the term was sometimes used to describe political movements in Europe that might not have been strictly ecological in nature. Additionally, before the official formation of the Ecological Society of America, there was an EcoQuest convention held in Memphis, which aimed to promote ecological awareness and collaboration. These examples highlight how the term ecology has sometimes been stretched or misused, which underscores the importance of understanding its true scientific and environmental roots. This ties back to our overall theme of clarifying what ecology truly means and how its proper understanding is vital for meaningful environmental action. Let's talk about the confusion the public and the media often have over certain names. It's interesting to ask, does any other science face this kind of misuse of its name? For example, does physics get misrepresented? Sometimes people think physics is just about promoting nuclear energy, which isn't accurate at all. Physics is a broad scientific discipline that explores the fundamental laws of nature, not a pro-nuclear energy philosophy. Then there's ecology. Many people mistakenly equate ecology with environmentalism, and in a way, they are often used interchangeably. But ecology is a scientific study of how organisms interact with their environment, while environmentalism is more of a philosophical or social movement aimed at protecting the environment. This kind of confusion shows how powerful names can be, but also how misleading they can become when misunderstood. Throughout this presentation, I want us to keep in mind how important clear understanding is, especially when it comes to these core concepts that influence public perception and policy. Let's take a moment to understand what the word ecology really means. It comes from the Greek words ekos, which means home, and ology, meaning the study of. So ecology is essentially the study of our home, Earth, and all the living things that share it. When we talk about plants in this context, we're exploring how they fit into this larger picture. Plants are a fundamental part of ecosystems because they produce oxygen, provide food, and create habitats for countless other organisms. Understanding ecology helps us see how plants interact with animals, soil, water, and even the climate. This connection highlights why studying plants and their environments is so crucial as we work to protect our planet. Animals, they are truly fascinating examples of biodiversity and adaptation. When we think about animals, we're really looking at a wide range of species, each uniquely designed to thrive in their environments. They play critical roles in ecosystems, from pollination and seed dispersal to maintaining the balance of food chains. Understanding animals helps us grasp the complexity of life on Earth and the importance of conservation. Throughout this presentation, we've seen how interconnected all living things are, and animals are a vital part of that web. Recognizing their diversity and the challenges they face underscores why protecting them is essential for the health of our planet. Decomposers are an essential part of any ecosystem. They play a crucial role in breaking down dead organic material, such as fallen leaves, dead animals, and other organic waste. By doing this, they help recycle nutrients back into the soil, making them available for plants to use again. This process is vital for maintaining the health and balance of ecosystems. Without decomposers, dead matter would accumulate, and nutrients would become locked away, disrupting the entire food chain. So, in the bigger picture of ecological sustainability, decomposers are like nature's recyclers, ensuring that energy and nutrients keep circulating. Microorganisms play a fundamental role in our environment, and understanding their interactions is key to grasping the bigger picture. When we talk about microorganisms, we're referring to tiny living entities like bacteria, fungi, and viruses that are everywhere around us. They interact with their environment in complex ways, which can be influenced by both biotic factors, like other living organisms, and abiotic factors, such as temperature, pH, and nutrient availability. These interactions are vital because they drive processes like nutrient cycling, decomposition, and even influence climate patterns. For example, some microorganisms help break down organic matter, returning essential nutrients to the soil and water. Others form symbiotic relationships with plants or animals, impacting health and growth. By understanding how microorganisms interact with the environment, we can better appreciate their role in maintaining ecological balance and their potential applications in areas like agriculture, medicine, and environmental management. It's a reminder that even the tiniest organisms have a huge impact on the world around us, connecting all parts of our ecosystem in intricate and fascinating ways. Our activities have complex effects on ecosystems, and this is a really important point to understand. When we talk about ecology, it's crucial to recognize that humans are a very significant species within these systems. Our impacts are not just minor. They can fundamentally alter ecosystems in both positive and negative ways. This means that our actions, whether through development, agriculture, or conservation efforts, play a major role in shaping the environment around us. By including humans as a key part of ecology, we acknowledge that our presence and activities are integral to the natural world, not separate from it. This perspective helps us see that managing our impacts is essential for maintaining healthy, functioning ecosystems. Ultimately, understanding these complex effects reminds us that we are deeply connected to the environment and that our choices have consequences that ripple through the entire web of life. This ties back to the overall theme of the presentation, our responsibility to understand and act thoughtfully within the ecosystems we are a part of. Let's take a moment to see how ecology gives us a solid scientific framework for understanding environmental issues that humans impact. It really helps us evaluate what's happening in ecosystems and why it matters. Now, focusing on the kelp forest habitat, its health and stability depend heavily on the presence of sea otters. These otters play a crucial role as predators that keep sea urchin populations in check. Without sea otters, sea urchins can overgraze the kelp, leading to the degradation of the entire kelp forest. So, their presence is essential for maintaining the balance and integrity of this habitat. This example highlights how interconnected species are and how important it is to consider these relationships when evaluating environmental challenges. It also ties into the broader idea that preserving key species is vital for ecosystem health and resilience. Now, let's take a closer look at some of the key biological disciplines that are closely related to ecology. These are interdisciplinary studies, meaning they overlap and complement each other to give us a fuller understanding of life and its interactions. First, we have genetics, which helps us understand how traits are inherited and how populations adapt over time. Next is physiology, the study of how organisms' bodies function, which is crucial for understanding their survival and responses to environmental changes. Then there's evolutionary biology, which explores how species evolve and diversify, giving us insight into how ecological relationships develop and shift. Finally, taxonomy and systematics help us classify and organize the diversity of life, providing a framework for studying ecological patterns. Together, these disciplines are interconnected, enriching our overall understanding of ecology and emphasizing the importance of an interdisciplinary approach in studying complex biological systems. So, what is an ecosystem? Let's start with the idea of a system. A system is made up of components that interact regularly and depend on each other. These parts work together, creating a unified whole. Now, when we talk about an ecosystem, we're referring to an ecological system. This includes not just the living community, plants, animals, microorganisms, but also the physical environment they're part of. Think of it as a complete, functioning system where both living and non-living elements are interconnected. Connecting this to our overall theme, understanding ecosystems helps us see how different parts of the environment rely on each other to maintain balance and health. Let's take a closer look at what an ecosystem really is. Essentially, it's a spatially explicit unit of the Earth, meaning it has defined boundaries in space. Within these boundaries, you'll find all the living organisms, plants, animals, microbes, and also all the non-living or abiotic components like water, soil, and air. What's important to understand is that an ecosystem isn't just about the organisms, but also how they interact with their environment. These interactions are critical because they drive the flows of energy and nutrients that sustain life within that system. By defining ecosystems this way, we see how interconnected everything is, living and non-living parts working together within a specific area. This concept helps us better understand the complexity of nature and how different components support each other, which is fundamental to the broader themes of ecology and environmental science. And as Gene Likens emphasizes, recognizing these units helps us appreciate the delicate balance and the importance of protecting these integrated systems on our planet. Or, more simply, an ecosystem is made up of all the living organisms and the physical environment in a specific area. When we talk about ecosystems, it's helpful to think about the different sizes they can be, ranging from very small, like a pond, to enormous, like a forest or even the entire planet. The key idea here is that an ecosystem isn't just about the plants and animals, but also includes the physical factors like water, soil, and climate that influence them. Understanding this helps us see how everything is interconnected, no matter the size, and it emphasizes the complexity and beauty of the natural world. Let's take a look at the levels of organization in ecology. Starting with the organism, which is the basic unit of life, every living thing we study is an organism. Moving up, we have populations, which are groups of the same species living together in a specific area. Then, we have communities, which include all the different populations that interact within a shared environment. Next, we have ecosystems, which encompass the communities along with the non-living components like air, water, and soil that support life. Finally, at the broadest level is the biosphere, the global sum of all ecosystems, representing the entire Earth's life support system. Understanding these levels helps us see how life is interconnected, from individual organisms to the entire planet. It's a way to organize complexity and better understand how everything fits together in the bigger picture of ecology. Ecosystems consist of, well, a wide variety of components that work together in complex ways. On one side, we have communities of animate or living things, plants, animals, microbes, etc., that all interact within their environment. These organisms play vital roles in maintaining the balance of the ecosystem. Then there's the inanimate stuff, things like rocks, soils, gases, and chemicals, that also form a crucial part of the system. These non-living components provide the foundation and resources that support life. A key point to understand is that ecosystems are dynamic because they exchange matter and energy. This exchange happens within the system itself. Think of how plants take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen, or how nutrients cycle through the soil and water. But it's not limited to just within one ecosystem. These exchanges also occur between different systems, connecting the larger environment. Finally, it's important to recognize that systems don't operate in isolation. They interact, are interdependent, and mutually reactive. Changes in one part of the system can ripple through and affect other parts, which highlights the interconnectedness that's central to understanding ecosystems as a whole. This interconnectedness is what makes ecosystems both resilient and vulnerable at the same time. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide. All right, let's dive into what F.A. Bazas called the rules of ecology. First, everything is connected to everything else. This means that in an ecosystem, nothing exists in isolation. Every plant, animal, and even the non-living components like water and soil influence each other in complex ways. Understanding these connections helps us see how changes in one part of the system can ripple through the whole environment. Next, everything must go somewhere. Waste, nutrients, and energy don't just disappear. They have to go somewhere within the system. If we add pollutants to a river, for example, they don't vanish. They move downstream or settle in sediments. Recognizing this helps us appreciate the importance of waste management and the impact our actions have on ecosystems. And finally, there's no such thing as a free lunch. This means that everything has a cost. Even natural resources, like water or timber, require effort and energy to produce or extract. There's always an exchange, which underscores the importance of sustainable practices. These rules really tie into the overall theme of ecology, that everything is interconnected and that our actions have consequences. They remind us to think carefully about how we interact with the environment and the importance of working within these natural principles. When H.T. Odum said, "To understand any system, you must understand the next larger system," he was emphasizing a really fundamental idea in ecology and systems thinking. It's like looking at a tree and realizing you need to consider the forest to truly understand the tree. The same goes for any complex system, whether it's an ecosystem, an economy, or even a social system. If you want to grasp how a specific part functions, you need to see how it fits into the bigger picture. This perspective helps us understand the flow of energy, matter, and information across different levels. It encourages us to think holistically, recognizing that each component is interconnected and influenced by the larger system it's a part of. This concept is central to our overall theme, which is about understanding the interconnectedness and complexity of environmental systems. By expanding our view, we gain a deeper insight into how everything works together, and that's key to making more informed decisions about sustainability and management. Now, let's take a closer look at the key attributes of ecosystems. First, order. This refers to the structured way in which ecosystems are organized, even though they might seem chaotic at first glance. Development is another important aspect, highlighting how ecosystems change and grow over time. Metabolism, or energy flow, is fundamental because it explains how energy moves through the system, supporting all the biological processes. Along with that, material cycles are crucial, as they describe how nutrients and other elements are recycled within the ecosystem. Response to the environment is also vital. Ecosystems constantly adapt to environmental changes, maintaining stability and resilience. Porous boundaries are another key point. Unlike artificial systems, ecosystems have permeable borders that allow the exchange of energy, organisms, and nutrients with their surroundings. It's important to emphasize that when we're talking about ecosystems, the focus is on function rather than just individual species. This means understanding how the parts work together to sustain the whole system, which is central to our overall theme of ecological interconnectedness. Let's take a closer look at energy flow in ecosystems. Energy flow refers to how energy moves through different organisms and levels within an ecosystem. It all begins with the sun, which is the primary source of energy. Plants, or producers, capture this sunlight through photosynthesis, converting it into chemical energy. This energy is then passed on to herbivores, or primary consumers, when they eat the plants. From there, energy continues to move up the food chain as carnivores, or secondary and tertiary consumers, consume the herbivores and other animals. It's important to understand that at each step, only a portion of the energy is transferred, usually about 10%. The rest is lost primarily as heat due to metabolic processes. This inefficiency means that energy flows in a one-way direction through the ecosystem, creating a pyramid of energy that shows decreasing energy levels at higher trophic levels. Connecting this to the overall theme, understanding energy flow helps us grasp how ecosystems sustain life and why maintaining balanced food chains is crucial. It highlights the importance of conserving producers and the foundational levels of the ecosystem, since they are the primary source of energy for all other organisms. Let's talk about energy flow in ecosystems. All organisms, whether they're plants, animals, or microbes, need energy to do pretty much everything: grow, maintain their body functions, reproduce, or move around. Because of this, there are two main things every organism depends on. First, they need a source of energy. That's where they get the fuel to keep going. Second, they experience a loss of usable energy, meaning not all the energy they take in is turned into work. Some of it is lost as heat or other forms. This continuous flow and loss of energy are fundamental to understanding how ecosystems function. It helps explain why energy must be constantly replenished and why energy transfer between organisms isn't 100% efficient. This concept ties back to our overall theme of energy dynamics, showing us how energy moves through the web of life and influences ecosystem stability and productivity. All right, let's talk about the different types of energy. First up, we have heat energy, which is the energy associated with the temperature of an object. Think of the warmth from the sun or a hot cup of coffee. Next, there's mechanical energy, which includes the energy of moving objects, like a rolling ball, and also gravitational energy. like when an object is lifted up high and has the potential to fall. Then there's chemical energy, which is a bit different. This is the energy stored in molecular bonds, the kind of energy we find in food, batteries, or fuel. It's the stored power that can be released during chemical reactions. Understanding these types of energy helps us see how energy moves and transforms in the world around us, connecting to the overall idea of energy conservation and transfer in physical systems. Let's explore how solar energy is converted into chemical energy. When sunlight hits green plants, especially through the process of photosynthesis, the energy from the sun is captured by chlorophyll molecules. This energy is then used to convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose, a form of chemical energy that plants can store and use. This process is fundamental because it forms the basis of the food chain, supporting all life on Earth. Essentially, solar energy is transformed into a stable chemical form that can be used by plants and indirectly by animals and humans. Now, these energy transformations don't just stop there. The chemical energy stored in plants can be transferred to animals when they eat plants, and some of that energy can be used to power movement, growth, and reproduction. Finally, some of the energy from these biological processes is eventually released as heat, completing the cycle. This flow of energy, from solar radiation to chemical energy, then to mechanical energy, and finally back to heat, is a key concept in ecosystem ecology because it explains how energy sustains life and drives ecological processes on our planet. Let's take a closer look at the abiotic components of an ecosystem. First, solar energy is absolutely crucial because it provides almost all the energy that fuels ecosystems. Without the sun, most life processes would come to a halt. Next, we have inorganic substances, like sulfur and boron. These elements tend to cycle through the ecosystem, moving from one organism or part of the environment to another, playing a key role in maintaining ecological balance. Finally, there are organic compounds, such as proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and other complex molecules. These serve as a vital link between the biotic, or living, components and the abiotic, or non-living, environment. They essentially connect the living organisms to the physical world around them, enabling energy flow and nutrient cycling. Understanding these abiotic factors helps us see how ecosystems function as integrated systems where energy and materials are constantly cycling and transforming. Let's take a closer look at the biotic components of an ecosystem. These components are classified based on how they acquire energy. Essentially, this classification helps us understand the roles different organisms play within their environment. There are two main categories here: autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs are organisms that produce their own food, typically through processes like photosynthesis. They are often called producers because they form the base of the food chain. On the other hand, heterotrophs cannot make their own food. Instead, they depend on consuming other organisms, plants, or animals that have already obtained energy. These are the consumers and decomposers within the ecosystem. Understanding this distinction is crucial because it ties directly into the flow of energy through an ecosystem. Autotrophs capture energy from the sun, which then gets transferred through various levels of heterotrophs. So, in the grand scheme, recognizing whether an organism is an autotroph or heterotroph helps us see how energy moves and how different species are interconnected within the ecosystem's web of life. Autotrophs, also known as self-nourishing organisms, are what we call primary producers. They are the foundation of most food webs because they produce their own food. In particular, photoautotrophs, which include green plants, algae, and some bacteria, use sunlight to fix energy. This means they take in energy from the sun and convert it into forms that they can store and use later. They do this by transforming simple inorganic compounds, like carbon dioxide and water, into complex organic compounds. These organic molecules are the building blocks of life and are essential for all other organisms. So, in essence, Photoautotrophs harness light energy and turn inorganic materials into organic matter, creating the basis for energy flow in ecosystems. This process is crucial because it connects the energy from the sun to living organisms, sustaining the entire food chain. Chemoautotrophs, also known as chemosynthesizers, are a fascinating group of bacteria. They have the remarkable ability to oxidize reduced inorganic substances, which are often sulfur or ammonia compounds. This process allows them to produce complex organic compounds, essentially creating their own food from inorganic sources. It's important to highlight that these bacteria don't rely on sunlight like plants do. Instead, they harness chemical energy from inorganic molecules. The key here is the oxidation of these reduced inorganic compounds, which provides the energy needed to synthesize organic molecules. This process is crucial in many ecosystems, especially in environments lacking sunlight, such as deep-sea vents. Overall, chemoautotrophs play a vital role in the Earth's biogeochemical cycles and demonstrate the incredible diversity of how life can obtain energy. Let's take a closer look at chemosynthesis near hydrothermal vents. These vents are fascinating environments found deep in the ocean, where sunlight doesn't reach. Instead of relying on sunlight for energy like most ecosystems, some organisms can actually produce food through a process called chemosynthesis. This process uses chemicals, such as hydrogen sulfide, that are abundant around these vents. Microorganisms, like bacteria, oxidize these chemicals to convert carbon molecules into organic matter. This organic matter then serves as the foundation for the entire vent ecosystem, supporting a variety of specialized creatures. This is a perfect example of how life can adapt to extreme environments and thrive without sunlight, which ties into the broader theme of life's incredible resilience and diversity in different habitats. Now, let's take a look at some other fascinating chemoautotrophs, specifically the nitrifying bacteria that live right in the soil under our feet. These bacteria are incredible because they can convert inorganic molecules into energy without needing sunlight or organic material. They play a crucial role in the nitrogen cycle by transforming ammonia into nitrite and then into nitrate. This process is essential for making nitrogen available to plants, which relies on it for growth. So, even though we often think of bacteria as simple microorganisms, these nitrifying bacteria are vital for maintaining healthy ecosystems and supporting life on Earth. Their ability to harness energy from inorganic compounds highlights the diverse strategies life uses to thrive in various environments, tying back to our overall theme of microbial diversity and ecological importance. Heterotrophs, or as we call them, other nourishing organisms, are quite different from autotrophs because they cannot produce their own food directly from sunlight and inorganic compounds. Instead, they depend on energy that has already been stored in more complex molecules. This means they have to consume other organisms or organic materials to get the energy they need. When we talk about simple inorganic compounds, we're referring to substances like carbon dioxide or minerals, which are not energy-rich by themselves. Heterotrophs take these inorganic compounds and, through various processes, build or break down complex organic compounds, like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, that contain the energy they require. It's important to note that this process can involve several steps and different types of organisms working together. For example, fungi, bacteria, and animals all play roles in transforming inorganic compounds into organic molecules, which then provide energy for different life forms. And finally, this entire process often results in some heat being released, which is a natural consequence of energy transformations and metabolic activities. So, in essence, heterotrophs rely on previously stored energy in organic molecules, making them fundamentally different from autotrophs, but equally vital in the flow of energy through ecosystems. Heterotrophs can be grouped into two main categories: consumers and decomposers. Consumers are organisms that eat other organisms to obtain their energy. They can be herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores, depending on what they eat. Decomposers, on the other hand, break down dead organic material, recycling nutrients back into the environment. Both groups are essential for maintaining the balance in ecosystems, as they help transfer energy and nutrients through different levels of the food chain. Understanding these groups helps us see how energy flows and how organic matter is recycled in nature. Now, let's talk about what consumers feed on in ecosystems. Essentially, they feed on organisms themselves or on particulate organic matter, which includes tiny bits of dead material. This is a crucial part of the energy flow in nature, as it helps recycle nutrients back into the environment. Moving on to decomposers, these organisms play a vital role by breaking down complex compounds found in dead protoplasm. Their activity is what transforms organic matter into simpler substances that can be reused by other organisms. The main groups of decomposers are bacteria and fungi. Bacteria are particularly important. They mainly feed on animal material, helping decompose things like dead insects or carcasses. Fungi, on the other hand, primarily feed on plants, breaking down plant tissues. However, bacteria also contribute significantly to some plant decomposition processes. Recognizing the different roles of bacteria and fungi highlights how diverse and specialized decomposers are, which ties into the broader theme of nutrient cycling and energy flow in ecosystems. Now, let's consider the laws of thermodynamics, starting with the basic idea that energy flow is a one-directional process. When the sun's energy reaches Earth, it primarily appears as heat with longer wavelengths. This energy then moves through different systems, but always in a single direction, outward or inward, never backwards. Focusing on the first law of thermodynamics, it's really about the conservation of energy. It tells us that energy can be transformed from one form to another, say, from solar energy to heat or chemical energy, but it can't be created from nothing or destroyed into nothing. This is a key concept because it underscores that all energy sources are interconnected and that energy transformations are fundamental to how ecosystems and the planet function. It also connects to the overall theme of energy flow and sustainability, reminding us that we need to understand how energy is conserved and transferred to better manage our resources. The second law of thermodynamics is a fundamental principle that explains how energy behaves in real-world processes. Essentially, it tells us that transformations of energy always lead to some loss or dissipation. In other words, whenever energy changes form, say, from chemical to thermal or mechanical, some energy becomes less useful, often turning into heat that disperses into the surroundings. This brings us to the idea of energy exchanges within a closed system. In such a system, the potential energy at the final state will always be less than what it was initially. This means energy is not only lost, but also spread out, making the system less capable of doing work over time. Now, a key concept tied to this is entropy, which we can think of as the measure of unavailable or unusable energy within a system. As entropy increases, the system becomes more disordered. This increase in disorder is a natural, inevitable trend. The universe tends toward higher entropy states. Finally, because systems tend to move from ordered to disordered states, maintaining order actually requires energy input. Think of it like trying to keep a room tidy. The more disorder that naturally occurs, the more energy you need to spend to keep things organized. This overall tendency toward disorder is why energy loss and entropy increase are so crucial in understanding how systems evolve over time. Let's look at some examples to understand how energy conversions work in real life. For instance, internal combustion engines in cars are only about 25% efficient. That means only a quarter of the chemical energy from fuel is turned into useful kinetic energy to move the car. The rest is lost, mostly as heat. This highlights how energy conversions are often imperfect and involve some waste. Now, on a more personal note, think about my house, especially my girls' rooms. Over time, these spaces tend to go from being neat and ordered to more cluttered and disordered. This is a natural process. Systems tend to move towards disorder unless energy is continuously put in to maintain order. Both examples connect to the bigger picture. Understanding how energy flows and transformations are crucial, whether we're talking about engines or everyday life. It reminds us that energy efficiency and the tendency toward disorder are fundamental concepts in thermodynamics. Let's take a closer look at the energy flow within an ecosystem. Simplistically, this pattern of energy transfer among different organisms forms what we call the trophic structure. Essentially, it describes how energy moves from one level to the next. At the base, we have the producers, which are typically plants or algae that convert sunlight into energy through photosynthesis. Then, we have the consumers, which are animals that eat the producers or other consumers. Next are the decomposers, like fungi and bacteria, that break down dead organic matter and recycle nutrients back into the system. Throughout this process, some energy is lost as heat at each step, which is a natural part of how energy flows in ecosystems. This pattern of energy transfer is fundamental because it helps us understand the dynamics of ecosystems and how energy sustains the different organisms within them. Recognizing this trophic structure is key to understanding the entire functioning of ecosystems and their overall health. Let's take a moment to consider the different types of organisms within these major groups, especially when we focus on the consumer group. It's really useful to distinguish between them because not all consumers are the same, and understanding these differences helps us get a clearer picture of how energy flows through ecosystems. So, when we talk about consumers, we're referring to organisms that don't produce their own food, but instead rely on consuming other organisms. Within this group, there are various types, and recognizing these distinctions is key to understanding their roles in ecological systems. By identifying these different consumer types, we can better appreciate their specific interactions, their diet choices, and their impact on the environment. This idea ties back to our overall theme of energy transfer and ecological balance, emphasizing the complexity and diversity of life within these major groups. Let's take a closer look at the terminology of trophic levels, especially when we focus on the consumers. We can further break down these levels to better understand how energy flows through an ecosystem. Starting with producers, which include plants, algae, and cyanobacteria. These are the organisms that capture energy directly from the environment, usually through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, and use that energy to produce complex organic compounds. They form the foundation of most food chains. Moving on to primary consumers, these are the herbivores that feed directly on the producers. Think of insects eating leaves or zooplankton consuming phytoplankton. They're the first step in transferring energy from the producers to higher levels. Next, we have secondary consumers, which feed on the primary consumers. These are often carnivores or omnivores that eat herbivorous animals, like a fish eating smaller invertebrates or a bird preying on insects. Finally, tertiary consumers are the top predators within this chain. They feed on secondary consumers. These could be larger fish, birds of prey, or even mammals at the top of their respective food webs. Understanding these trophic levels, especially the different consumer levels, helps us see how energy is transferred and how ecosystems are interconnected. It's a key concept that ties into the overall theme of energy flow and ecological balance. Now, let's explore more trophic levels in the ecosystem. First, we have detritivores, which are invertebrates that feed on organic wastes and dead organisms, also known as detritus, from all trophic levels. These creatures play a crucial role in breaking down and recycling organic material. Next, we have decomposers, including bacteria and fungi. Their job is to break down dead material into inorganic materials, like nutrients and minerals, which then become available for plants and other organisms. Both detritivores and decomposers are essential for maintaining the balance and flow of energy in ecosystems. They ensure that organic waste doesn't accumulate and that nutrients are continuously recycled, supporting the health of the entire ecosystem. This highlights how energy transfer isn't just a simple chain from producers to consumers, but a more complex web involving these important organisms that process and recycle organic matter. Let's talk about some alternate terminology we use in ecology. First, we have producers, which are primarily plants and other organisms that capture energy directly from the sun through photosynthesis. They form the foundation of most food webs. Next, herbivores are animals that eat plants, while carnivores are those that eat other animals. You'll also often see omnivores, which have a more varied diet. They eat both plants and animals. Now, within herbivores, there are specialized groups. For example, granivores are seed-eaters. Think of certain birds or rodents that primarily feed on seeds. Then, we have frugivores, which are fruit-eaters. These animals play important roles in seed dispersal and plant reproduction. Recognizing these distinctions helps us understand the complexity and diversity of food relationships in ecosystems. And it ties back to our overall theme of energy flow and interactions within biological communities. Together, these groups make up a food chain. Think of it as a sequence where energy and nutrients pass from one organism to another. For example, imagine grass, then a rabbit that eats the grass, and finally an eagle that preys on the rabbit. Now, within this chain, there are different roles. A producer is the organism like grass that makes its own food through photosynthesis. Herbivores, like the rabbit, eat plants, and carnivores, like the eagle, eat other animals. Understanding these roles helps us see how energy flows through ecosystems, connecting to the bigger picture of how life is interconnected. Now, let's take a closer look at carnivores. Carnivores can actually be divided into different groups based on their position in the food chain. At the top, we have the quaternary carnivores, which are often considered the apex predators. Beneath them are tertiary carnivores, then secondary carnivores, and finally primary carnivores. The key idea here is that each level depends on the one below it for food. The last carnivore in a chain, which typically isn't eaten by any other carnivore, is what we call the top carnivore. This position is crucial because these animals often regulate the populations of the species below them, maintaining balance in the ecosystem. Understanding these distinctions helps us see how energy flows through food webs and highlights the importance of top predators in maintaining healthy ecosystems. It's a fundamental concept that ties into the overall theme of energy transfer and ecological stability. Let's talk about food chains. Food chains are a simple way to understand how energy moves through an ecosystem. They show us who eats whom in a particular environment. At the base, we usually have plants or other producers that make their own food through photosynthesis. These are the primary energy sources. Next, herbivores or plant-eaters consume the producers, and then carnivores or meat-eaters prey on those herbivores. Sometimes, you'll have top predators at the very end of the chain, with no natural enemies. Remember, each step in this chain is called a trophic level. Understanding food chains helps us see the flow of energy and how different species are interconnected. This concept is important because it highlights the delicate balance within ecosystems and how disrupting one part can affect the entire system. So, food chains are more than just a sequence. They're a glimpse into the complex web of life that sustains our environment. So, when we look at these common problems, the first one is that the models are often too simplistic. They tend to oversimplify complex ecological interactions, which can lead to inaccurate or incomplete predictions. It's important to recognize that ecosystems are intricate, and capturing that complexity is crucial for meaningful analysis. Next, we see the absence of detritivores in some models. Detritivores play a vital role in ecosystems by breaking down organic matter and recycling nutrients. Ignoring them can skew the understanding of energy flow and nutrient cycling within the system. Then there's the issue of chains being too long. In ecological networks, overly extended chains can make the model less realistic and harder to manage. Shorter, more accurate chains tend to reflect real-world interactions better and improve the model's usefulness. Overall, addressing these problems helps us develop more realistic and reliable models, which is key for understanding and managing ecological systems effectively. Rarely are things as simple as grass, rabbit, hawk, or indeed any simple linear sequence of organisms. In nature, the relationships between organisms are usually much more complex. Instead of a straightforward chain, what we often see is a web of interconnected interactions. This is what we call a food web. A food web captures the reality that many species have multiple food sources, and they can be prey for different predators. So, rather than thinking of a single line of who eats whom, picture a network where various organisms are linked in multiple ways. This complexity is key to understanding how ecosystems function and how energy flows through them. It shows us that changes to one part of the web can have ripple effects across the entire system. And that's an important concept to keep in mind as we explore the dynamics of ecosystems and their stability. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide. Let's talk about energy transfers among trophic levels. Have you ever wondered how much energy actually makes it from one level to the next? Well, only a fraction of the energy is passed along, typically around 10%. This means that as you go up each trophic level, a lot of energy is lost, mostly as heat. Now, how efficient are these transfers? Not very, actually. This inefficiency is a key reason why food chains are usually only a few levels long. It connects directly to the overall theme of energy flow in ecosystems, showing us how energy availability shapes the structure and size of food webs. Understanding these energy transfers helps us grasp why ecosystems are organized the way they are, and why energy conservation is so crucial in maintaining healthy environments. Let's talk about biomass. Biomass refers to the dry mass of organic material in the organism or organisms we're studying. It's important to note that when we measure biomass, we're usually not including the water content. Why? Because water varies a lot and doesn't provide any usable energy, so for energy calculations, we focus on the dry mass. Now, moving on to standing crop. This term describes the amount of biomass present at any given point in time. It's like taking a snapshot of how much organic material is stored in a particular area right now. Both concepts are central to understanding energy flow in ecosystems. Biomass gives us a measure of the stored energy potential, while standing crop helps us understand the current state of that energy storage. Together, they help us see how energy is accumulated and transferred across different parts of an ecosystem. Let's talk about primary productivity. This is essentially the rate at which producers, like plants and phytoplankton, capture energy from their environment. It's a crucial concept because it tells us how much energy is being converted into new biomass over a certain period of time and within a specific area. In other words, it measures how quickly producers are growing and adding new material. This process forms the foundation of most food webs, as it determines how much energy is available for consumers. So, understanding primary productivity helps us grasp the overall productivity and health of an ecosystem. It's a key piece in understanding how energy flows through the natural world. All right, let's talk about gross primary production, or GPP. This is essentially the total amount of energy that plants and other producers capture through photosynthesis. Think of it as the overall energy input into an ecosystem from the producer's perspective. Now, net primary production, or NPP, takes this a step further. It's what's left after the producers use some energy for their own respiration, so GPP minus respiration. This remaining energy is really important because it represents the amount of energy that's actually stored by the producers. And that stored energy is what becomes available to the next level, the consumers and decomposers. So, in essence, NPP is the energy that fuels the entire food web, making it a crucial concept for understanding how ecosystems function and sustain life. It connects directly to the overall theme of energy flow and productivity in ecosystems. Secondary productivity is essentially the rate at which consumers produce new biomass. In other words, it's how fast consumers convert the organic material they consume into their own new tissue or biomass. Think of it as the growth rate of consumer populations based on the energy they take in. It's important to understand that this process involves the reorganization or repackaging of energy that was originally captured by producers, like plants or algae. No new energy enters the system at this stage. Instead, the consumers are just using the energy they get from what producers have already captured and stored. Because of this, the terms gross and net productivity aren't really quite appropriate here. Unlike primary production, where you might distinguish between total energy captured and energy remaining after respiration, secondary production doesn't involve the addition of new energy. It's simply a transformation of existing energy within the food chain. This concept ties into the broader theme of energy flow in ecosystems, showing us how energy, once captured by producers, is transferred and transformed as it moves through different levels of consumers. It's a key part of understanding ecological efficiency and how energy sustains life across different trophic levels. Let's talk about ecological pyramids. These are visual tools that help us understand different aspects of an ecosystem, like the standing crop, productivity, or the number of organisms at each trophic level. Imagine a pyramid where each section represents one of these components, and the size of each section reflects how much of that item is present. For example, a larger base might indicate a greater biomass of producers, while the narrower top shows fewer top predators. It's important to remember that while pyramids are great for giving us a clear, overall picture of the trophic structure, they don't show the complex interactions that happen in a real food web. Predators, prey, competition, all those details are more intricate than what a simple pyramid can illustrate. But despite this simplification, pyramids are very useful conceptual tools. They help us quickly grasp the flow of energy and the organization of an ecosystem, providing a visual summary that's easy to understand. So, in essence, ecological pyramids give us a snapshot of the ecosystem's structure, helping us see the big picture more clearly. Let's take a closer look at the pyramid of energy. This diagram shows how energy flows, or how productive each trophic level is in an ecosystem. The key idea here is that energy decreases as we move up the food chain. Due to the laws of thermodynamics, specifically the second law, some energy is always lost as heat through respiration at each level. That's why the pyramid tapers off as you go higher. It's important to remember that this energy loss limits the number of higher-level consumers an ecosystem can support. So, the pyramid visually emphasizes the efficiency, or rather the inefficiency, of energy transfer between trophic levels. This concept ties into the overall theme of energy flow and sustainability in ecosystems. Let's take a closer look at the pyramid of numbers. This diagram represents the number of individual organisms at each trophic level in an ecosystem. It helps us visualize how populations are distributed across producers, herbivores, and carnivores. One important thing to remember is that the size or individual biomass of these organisms can vary widely, so counting individuals doesn't necessarily tell us about how much energy or productivity is involved. For example, a single large tree might support many herbivores, but the number of trees alone doesn't reflect the energy flow. So, while the pyramid of numbers gives us a good snapshot of population sizes, it doesn't fully capture the dynamics of energy transfer within the ecosystem. That's why it's just one piece of the bigger picture in understanding ecological relationships. Let's take a look at the pyramid of standing crop. This diagram shows us how much biomass is present at each trophic level at a specific moment in time. Essentially, it gives us a snapshot of the total living material, or biomass, in the ecosystem at that point. Just like the pyramids of numbers we discussed earlier, the pyramid of standing crop helps us visualize the distribution of biomass across different levels. However, it's important to remember that this kind of pyramid doesn't always perfectly reflect how energy flows through the system. That's because organisms vary greatly in size and growth rates. For example, a large tree might have a lot of biomass, but isn't necessarily consuming or transferring energy at the same rate as smaller, faster-growing plants. Now, when we look at this pyramid, we see the biomass of producers at the bottom, which are typically plants or phytoplankton, those that generate energy through photosynthesis. Above that, we have the biomass of herbivores, which consume the producers, and at the top, the biomass of carnivores, which prey on herbivores. Keep in mind, this snapshot helps us understand the standing biomass at a given moment, but it doesn't tell us about the flow of energy over time. That's a key point when studying ecosystem dynamics and how energy transfer differs from simply measuring biomass. Let's talk about inverted pyramids. Typically, when we think about standing crop or numbers in an ecosystem, we imagine a pyramid where the lower levels, like producers, are larger than the higher levels, like herbivores and carnivores. But sometimes, this isn't the case. An inverted pyramid occurs when a higher trophic level actually has a larger standing crop than a lower one. This might sound counterintuitive at first, but it makes sense when you consider the dynamics involved. For example, a higher trophic level, such as carnivores, might have a larger biomass if the lower level, like herbivores, has a very high turnover rate. That means the herbivores are constantly being replaced, small individuals growing quickly and being eaten before they accumulate into a large biomass. Importantly, this doesn't violate the first and second laws of thermodynamics. It simply reflects that the lower trophic level has a high productivity and rapid turnover of small individuals, so their biomass at any given moment is relatively low despite high productivity. So when we look at a snapshot of biomass, say, of producers, herbivores, and carnivores at one point in time, the carnivores might appear to outweigh the herbivores, and the herbivores might outweigh the producers, creating this inverted pyramid. This concept highlights how energy flow and organism turnover rates influence ecosystem structure, and it reminds us that standing biomass isn't always a straightforward indicator of productivity or energy transfer. Let's take a closer look at the pyramid of yearly biomass production. When we consider the total biomass produced by a trophic level over an entire year or the appropriate cycle, it actually mirrors the pyramid of energy flow. This is because biomass can essentially be equated to energy. So, the amount of biomass generated at each level over time reflects the energy transferred through the food chain. This means that the shape of the biomass pyramid will resemble the pyramid of energy flow, highlighting how energy and biomass are interconnected in ecosystems. Understanding this helps us see the bigger picture of how energy moves and accumulates within different trophic levels over time. Let's talk about pyramids of energy and yearly biomass production. These can never be inverted, and the reason is grounded in the laws of thermodynamics. Essentially, energy flows in a way that always respects these fundamental principles, so you can't have a pyramid where the energy at the top exceeds that at the bottom. On the other hand, pyramids of standing crop and numbers can sometimes appear inverted. This is because the number of organisms present at any one time doesn't necessarily reflect the amount of energy flowing through the system. To make this clearer, think about it in terms of your own food intake. Imagine the amount of food you eat in a year versus the amount of food sitting in your pantry at any given moment. The pantry might have less food than you consume annually, but that doesn't mean you're not consuming a large amount of energy over time. So, the key point here is understanding that energy pyramids are constrained by thermodynamic laws, while population or biomass pyramids can be misleading if interpreted out of context. This distinction is crucial for accurately understanding energy flow in ecosystems and how we interpret different types of ecological pyramids. Now, let's take a look at some examples of food webs, starting with the North Sea. Here, we see a complex network of interactions among various marine species. This web illustrates how energy flows through the ecosystem, from tiny plankton up to larger predators like fish and seabirds. Next, I want to highlight a hypothetical web. This is a simplified model that shows how changes in one part of the web can affect the entire system. For instance, if a key species declines or disappears, it can have ripple effects, impacting other species and ultimately affecting overall species diversity. This example underscores an important point. Food webs are interconnected and delicate. Disruptions, whether from human activities or environmental changes, can reduce biodiversity and alter the stability of ecosystems. So, understanding these webs helps us see the bigger picture of how species coexist and depend on each other for survival. By studying these food webs, we gain insights into the resilience of ecosystems and the importance of maintaining healthy, balanced populations to support biodiversity across different environments like the North Sea and beyond. Now, let's look at some examples of pyramids in different ecosystems. First, we'll consider terrestrial and freshwater communities, which are foundational to understanding energy flow and biomass distribution on land and in freshwater systems. Moving on to ocean communities, specifically the English Channel, we see how marine ecosystems also follow similar pyramid structures, but with their unique dynamics. These examples help illustrate how energy and biomass are organized across various environments, highlighting the universal principles of ecological pyramids that we've been discussing throughout this presentation. Understanding these diverse systems reinforces the importance of pyramids in analyzing and comparing ecosystem productivity and stability worldwide.